Hare Krishna, everyone. Dandavat Pranams. Welcome to the second in our series of talks on the Bhagavad Gita, or rather readings from the Bhagavad Gita, our Bite-Size Talks series. As you know, here at the Hare Krishna Project, we are passionate about sharing the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita with the ordinary, everyday Western public. So once a month, we're producing these short talks from the Bhagavad Gita. And we are reading literally a verse from the Gita, reading Srila Prabhupada's purport, and then giving a very brief explanation as to what it means. We are passionate about sharing Bhakti Yoga, sharing Krishna consciousness with the Western public and presenting it to them in an easy and digestible way. Also, as you know, here at the Hare Krishna Project, we have a preference for reading and distributing Srila Prabhupada's original books. So we will always, if we can, read from Prabhupada's books that are pre-1978, those that are authorized by him. So throughout this series of talks, including today, I am reading from the 1972 Macmillan edition of the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Okay, today's verse is actually one of my favorite verses, possibly my most favorite verse in all of Sastra, if not definitely the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll explain why a bit later on. But today's verse is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 20. Lord Krishna, God himself, says, "For the soul there is never birth nor death, nor having once been, nor does he ever cease to be. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, undying and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain." And this is Prabhupada's purport on Bhagavad Gita 2:20. Qualitatively, the small atomic fragmental part of the Supreme Spirit is one with the Supreme. He undergoes no changes like the body. Sometimes the soul is called the steady or kutascha. The body is subject to 6 kinds of transformations. It takes its birth in the womb of the mother's body, remains for some time, grows, produces some effects, gradually dwindles, and at last vanishes into oblivion. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because he takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death. And because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. He is eternal, ever existing, and primeval, that is. There is no trace in history of his coming into being. Under the impression of the body, we seek the history of birth, etc., of the soul. The soul does not at any time become old as the body does. The so-called old man therefore feels himself to be in the same spirit as in his childhood or youth. The changes of the body do not affect the soul. The soul does not deteriorate like a tree or anything material. The soul has no byproduct either. The byproducts of the body, namely children, are also different individual souls, and owing to the body, they appear as children of a particular man. The body develops because of the soul's presence, but the soul has neither offshoots nor change. Therefore, the soul is free from the 6 changes of the body. The meaning and purport of this verse is the same as in the Bhagavad Gita, but here in this verse there is one special word, vipachit, which means learned or with knowledge. The soul is full of knowledge, or full always with consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart, where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to clouds or for some other reason. But the light of the sun is always there, and we are convinced that it is therefore daytime. As soon as there is a little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. The consciousness of the soul is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme Consciousness is all knowledge past, present, and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna. But Krishna is not like the forgetful soul. If so, Krishna's teachings of Bhagavad Gita would be useless. There are two kinds of souls, namely the minute particle soul, Anu Atma, and the super soul, Vaibhu Atma. This is also confirmed in the Katha Upanishad in this way. In the Katha Upanishad 1.2.20, it says, both the super soul or Paramatma and the atomic soul, Jiva Atma, are situated on the same tree of the body within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires as well as lamentations can, by the grace of the Supreme, understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is the fountainhead of the super soul, as it will be disclosed in the following chapters. And Arjuna is the atomic soul, forgetful of his real nature. Therefore, he requires to be enlightened by Krishna or by his bona fide representative, the Supreme, the spiritual master. That was quite a long purport, but it was useful for us to read that. Bhagavad Gita 2.20 is one of my favorite verses, and it's actually a verse I use every now and then when talking to non-devotees. I don't really like that term, but people who are not practitioners of Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Bhakti Yoga. And let me give you two reasons why. One of the things that attracted me to Vaishnavism, to Krishna consciousness 20 years ago, was the teachings, was the information provided in the Bhagavad Gita as it is. I had a Christian upbringing. I was involved with the Methodist Church. And as much as I appreciated my time with the Methodist Church, with the Christian Church, the Bible and Christian teachings, for me, didn't go deep enough. I wanted to know more about the nature of the soul, the nature of my existence, the nature of my relationship with the Supreme Person, who we recognize as Krishna. And as much as the Bible doesn't really give us much information about the soul and the nature of the soul, the Vedic literatures, of which one is the Bhagavad Gita, does. They do provide us with information about the nature of the soul. And Bhagavad Gita 2.20 very clearly explains that the soul is eternal. The soul has always existed. The soul has existed before we were in our mother's wombs, and the soul will ourselves, our real true self, individual spiritual beings, will continue to exist after our physical death. We are eternal. Somebody once told me something that I remember almost every day. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And that's a phrase or a catchphrase I use often when I go and give talks in schools, in public libraries, at events around the country, to share the fundamental basic teachings of Krishna consciousness. This verse tells us that Krishna says the soul is eternal. That's why, despite almost approaching 40, I still feel younger than 40. And secondly, I still feel like I'm the same person as when I was 15, 16, or 17. Now, of course, I'm different. Physically, I've changed. I've got a man's body rather than a teenage boy's body, but I'm still the same person. The me, the spiritual being, the self, hasn't changed. And the Bhagavad Gita confirms this in chapter 2, verse 20. The other reason I really like this verse, because actually it's a verse I often share, or when I have the opportunity, to people who are not followers of the Krishna consciousness tradition. And often, believe it or not, it's a verse I share with people when they've lost a loved one, when someone's died. Now, most people in society, not everyone, would be of the view that there's something after this life, that people go to heaven, or maybe there's a state of limbo, or people are reborn. But most people like to think, maybe even just to make themselves feel better and have some kind of sentimental, emotional feel-good type factor, most people accept and want to accept there is something after this life. And often when someone's passed away, I will share this verse with them to say, hey, of course, your husband or your wife or your parent or your child's body has stopped existing. But take comfort in knowing that he or she still exists. And actually, they'll live forever. We'll all live forever, not in a Peter Pan type way that will stay young forever, but ultimately, our true selves, we will live forever. And this verse, I find, does bring a lot of comfort to people who are not followers of Bhakti Yoga. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 20, for the soul there is neither birth nor death, nor having once been, does he ever cease to be. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, undying, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Hare Krishna.